She boarded the plane like anyone else, quiet, unassuming, just another face in the crowd. But when the engine suddenly failed mid-flight, she was the only person on board who knew what to do. Flight 227 from Dallas to Colorado Springs had taken off right on schedule. The skies were clear, the ride smooth, no turbulence, no alarms, just the soft voice of the captain giving routine updates, the beverage cart making its rounds, and passengers half watching movies or scrolling through their phones, barely paying attention. In seat 14C, Ayanna Fielding sat over the wing, middle seat. Not her favorite, but she didn't complain. Her earlier flight had been overbooked, and this one was the only available option. She accepted it with the quiet calm she carried everywhere, something she'd practiced for years. Dressed in dark jeans and a soft green pullover, hair pulled neatly into a bun, she blended in, and she liked it that way. The man beside her grumbled about legroom. A teenager on her other side laughed at something on his phone. Neither gave her a second glance. That was fine. She wasn't traveling for work. No conference, no lecture, no big presentation. Just a personal trip to visit her mom in Pueblo after a phone call that felt different than usual. "Come soon if you can," her mother had said. And so Ayanna packed light and boarded. As she worked through a crossword puzzle and slowly chewed a mint, the engines hummed steadily. From where she sat, just behind the wing, she could hear the mechanical shifts as the plane adjusted for altitude. Most passengers wouldn't notice the subtle change in sound, but Ayanna did. Always had. Years in the Air Force will do that. What the others didn't know was that Ayanna had once worked as a flight systems engineer, running diagnostics on military aircraft so advanced they required entire manuals just to power up. Now, she quietly taught engineering at a small university in Amarillo. Nothing flashy, just students, equations, and lab time. She rarely talked about her past, not because she was hiding anything, but because people reacted strangely when they learned she'd logged more time in a simulator than some pilots did in the sky. None of that seemed relevant today. She wasn't Dr. Fielding on this flight, just another traveler on her way home. Out the window, the late afternoon sun painted the wing with gold, casting long shadows over the New Mexico plains below. It was a peaceful moment, until something changed. A small dip, barely noticeable. But Ayanna saw the flicker in the cabin lights. Once, then again. Something about the timing set off a warning in her gut. The engine tone wavered, just enough that she felt it in her chest before she even heard it. Then the drop, not a bump, not turbulence. This was sharp, fast, like the plane had been yanked downward. A collective gasp rose in the cabin. Cups spilled, trays slid. A few passengers cried out. Ayanna's hand gripped the armrest. Her training kicked in. She knew this wasn't standard behavior for a commercial jet, not at this altitude, not like this. Then total silence. For 2 terrifying seconds, the plane lost all power. No engine hum, no air circulation, no cabin lights, just darkness and weightlessness. Emergency lights sputtered to life in a dim orange glow, barely illuminating the aisle. The cabin felt suspended in time. Ayanna leaned forward, bracing herself, scanning for clues. The teen next to her tore out his earbuds, sitting upright in panic. The man on her other side muttered something under his breath, clutching both armrests. Then the oxygen masks dropped, row after row, a cold snap and a dull thud as yellow cups dangled above panicked faces. Some passengers fumbled, a few screamed. Across the aisle, a woman couldn't steady her hands enough to secure her mask. Fear was taking over, but Ayanna didn't panic. Not yet. Because while everyone else was waiting for answers, she was already searching for them. Ayanna calmly reached for her oxygen mask and secured it with practiced ease. She glanced upward. The cabin lights weren't flickering anymore. They were completely out. The familiar hum of the engines had vanished, replaced by a low, unsettling sound she recognized instantly. The aircraft wasn't flying anymore. It was gliding. That meant one thing: the engines had shut down. No thrust, no lift adjustment, no hydraulic support. Her thoughts raced. Based on the size and sound of the jet, it was likely a twin-engine regional model. For this kind of plane to lose power entirely, it meant something major had failed, likely the electrical system, or maybe worse. A tall flight attendant stumbled into the aisle, clearly rattled, and tried to address the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. Pull down your masks and breathe normally," she said, her voice cracking. Her hands shook, and her composure was fading fast. But it was what she said next that made Ayanna listen more closely. "There has been a systems error. The captain and first officer are currently assessing the situation." The attendant turned, trying to reach the cockpit through her radio. The static crackled, followed by bursts of muffled voices, tense, not panicked, but close. Ayanna leaned in, trying to catch every word. "Rudder not responding. Controls down. Check hydraulic line 3. Ayanna's pulse picked up. This wasn't just a minor issue. It was a full systems breakdown. And now even rudder control was gone. That meant the flight surfaces weren't responding. They weren't just descending. They had lost command of the plane. She reached under the seat, pulled out her backpack, and unzipped the front pocket. Inside was a pen and small notepad. Her hand moved fast, scribbling notes as her brain connected the technical dots. She'd done this before, back in active service in hangars far from home, when aircraft left the ground not knowing if they'd return the same way. The man seated beside her looked over, bewildered. "What are you doing?" "Listening," she replied, eyes still on the cockpit. "To what?" "To what they're not saying out loud." He blinked. She didn't explain further. There wasn't time. Ayanna scanned the overhead panel, then looked at the flight attendant again, just as another garbled message came through the radio. The woman turned toward the cabin, face pale, attempting to keep control as she walked the aisle. But Ayanna could see it. She was overwhelmed. Further down the plane, chaos had begun to spread. A woman was crying out prayers. A man was leaving a voicemail that sounded like a goodbye. A child's voice screamed for their mother. Emotionally, the cabin was already spiraling, and they hadn't even touched the ground. But Ayanna wasn't watching the passengers anymore. She was watching the cockpit door. It hadn't opened once, and in a crisis like this, the flight crew should have at least made some announcement, given some assurance. The silence told her everything. Either the crew was fully absorbed in damage control, or they were out of their depth. Someone had to act. She unbuckled her seatbelt. The sign was still on, but that no longer mattered. The plane wasn't jolting. It was slowly dropping, like something too heavy to stay in the air. Gasps echoed around her as she stood. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," the flight attendant called out, already rushing over. "I need to speak with the captain," Ayanna said evenly. We're handling it," the attendant stammered. "No, you're not," Ayanna said plainly. "If the rudder isn't responding and the backup hydraulics haven't kicked in, they've lost surface control. If they're still gliding at this altitude, they've got maybe 10 minutes less before they need to land or ditch. There's no time to troubleshoot both." The flight attendant stopped cold. Ayanna looked at her, not scared, not angry, just direct. "I'm a former Air Force flight systems engineer. I trained pilots for this exact type of failure. I know what's going on, and I can help." For a second, the woman stood frozen. Then she nodded once and turned toward the cockpit. The man in seat 14A leaned back, stunned. "Wait, are you for real?" Ayanna didn't answer. Her focus was locked on the front of the plane. 30 tense seconds passed before the cockpit door finally cracked open. Already too long. The attendant spoke quickly to the captain, voice low but urgent. Then the door opened wider and the pilot stepped into the aisle. He was younger than she expected, late 30s maybe, with tired eyes and sweat along his brow. His gaze swept the cabin like he wasn't sure who he was looking for. "Which one is she?" The attendant pointed. Ayanna stepped forward. "You said you worked flight systems?" 15 years, Air Force. I helped write emergency protocols for failures like this." He blinked, surprised. "What are you doing back here in coach?" Ayana offered a brief smile. Just trying to get home. The pilot looked toward the cockpit, then stepped aside. Come in. The moment she stepped inside, she could tell the situation was worse than she expected. The co-pilot had one side of his headset dangling, frantically flipping switches that weren't responding. One of the main displays had gone completely dark. Another was flashing erratic, jumping altitude data. Worse, the manual controls weren't giving any feedback at all. Total systems failure, she asked. Yeah, started about 12 minutes ago, the captain said grimly. We lost redundancy in the hydraulic systems. Some kind of electrical surge took out half the board. A PU? Offline, won't reset. Ayana leaned over to inspect the secondary panel. Did you check the backup bus switch for the bleed air override? The co-pilot looked at her blankly. We didn't. We were trying to cycle power through the backup generator, but the main loop's dead. That's why you lost rudder response, she explained. If the pressure valves are stuck open, you're dumping everything through line 3. Nothing's reaching the tail. She paused, then asked, May I? The captain hesitated, then gave her a nod. Ayana carefully toggled 2 switches and then flipped a third. She looked up. Try the rudder pedals, just light pressure. The captain did. His eyes widened. It's moving, barely, but it's something. It'll be enough to stabilize you, but you need to pick a landing site now. You've got maybe 80 miles left in this airframe before gravity takes over. The co-pilot pulled up terrain data. There's an old emergency strip near Socorro. Not ideal, but it's listed. Ayana nodded. That'll do. Come in from the west. Make the approach wide. Keep the turn shallow. You don't have the yaw control for anything tight. The captain let out a long breath. You just saved this plane. Ayana didn't respond. She didn't need to. The cabin behind them was still tense. Passengers clinging to armrests, whispering prayers, hoping for answers. No one knew that the woman in 14C had just diagnosed and partially corrected a failure even the flight deck hadn't been able to figure out. But fixing the controls was only the first step. The hard part was still ahead, getting the plane on the ground. Ayana remained in the cockpit, just behind the 2 pilots. The door was locked again as required. The air felt heavier now, thick with focus and adrenaline. Socorro airstrip is about 70 miles out, the co-pilot said. We're at 28,000 feet and descending. If you can hold your glide speed, he started. You won't, Ayana cut in, gently but firmly. No thrust, no hydraulic boost. You'll bleed off speed trying to stay aligned. You've probably got 60 miles, maybe less, depending on the wind. The pilot looked at her. Dump weight? Too late. You won't be able to open the gear bay manually without bleed pressure, and if gravity drop only releases 1 wheel, you'll spin out. So, belly landing? She nodded once. That's your best option now. The pilot leaned back, absorbing the reality. The co-pilot turned to her, incredulous. How do you know all this? Ayana gave a faint smile. I used to run emergency simulations like this for a living, just without 147 people watching. The captain stared at his instruments. What would you do in my place? I'd stay off the radio, she said simply. No need to wait for someone in a tower reading out steps from a manual. Stay focused. Begin your descent. Steady and smooth. No sudden drops. The co-pilot started adjusting trim manually. We're going in blind. No approach lights at that strip. Ayana reached for the small flashlight mounted beside the console and shined it onto the printed terrain map. There are hills to the west, but a flat clearing just beyond the strip. Aim long. If you overshoot, at least you're still alive. The captain stared at the map for a moment. Then he reached for the cockpit phone. His voice came over the PA, quiet but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've experienced a critical power failure. We're currently gliding toward an emergency airstrip in New Mexico. The situation is under control. Please remain in your seats with your masks on. Stay calm. We're going to get through this. He hung up the phone and looked at Ayana. I meant that. I'm not saying it to be dramatic, but if you hadn't stood up, I don't think we'd still be in the air. Ayana gave a small nod. Her voice was quieter now. There's one thing left to do. Land this aircraft. Then you can thank me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, a knock came at the cockpit door. The flight attendant's voice followed. She's asking for Dr. Fielding, the flight attendant whispered. The captain looked puzzled. I thought you were staying up here. I just need 10 seconds with someone, Ayana replied. I'll be right back. He buzzed the lock, and Ayana stepped out into the cabin. The attendant led her down the aisle to a woman gripping her tray table so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her young daughter sat beside her, silently crying into a worn, stuffed animal. I didn't know who else to ask, the woman said, voice trembling. They said you knew what was happening. Are we going to make it? Ayana knelt beside her. Yes, she said softly, but firmly. You are. The woman's tears came faster. Ayana gently reached across and took both her hands. We'll be landing in under 15 minutes. It's going to be rough but quick, and you'll walk off this plane with your daughter. I need you to believe that. The woman nodded shakily. Ayana stood and addressed the row. Breathe slow. Stay low in your seat. The front will take the worst of it. You'll feel a hard impact and maybe some skidding, but that's part of the landing plan. Someone a few rows behind asked, Wait, who are you? Ayana didn't answer that. Put your mask back on and keep it secure. Then she turned and walked back to the cockpit, but even she wasn't sure the plan would hold. The descent had started, smooth, shallow, controlled for now. But as the mountains near Socorro rose in the distance, what once looked scenic now loomed far too close. The horizon was tilting ever so slightly, the nose dipping lower. Speed's dropping faster than expected, the co-pilot muttered, tapping a screen that didn't respond. I'm getting bad readings. Forget the screen, Ayana said. You're flying a powerless glide with weight behind you. Feel the stick, trust your hands. The captain adjusted gently, his grip steady but tense. Ayana pointed at the terrain map again. Approach from the west. You've got a flat stretch beyond the ridge. If you descend too early, you'll clip it. Too late, and you'll overshoot. The co-pilot nodded. If we overshoot, it's over. Undershoot, we just crash slower. Ayana's eyes didn't flinch. Then don't miss. Out in the cabin, silence had replaced panic. Passengers could feel it now. They were low. You didn't need aviation training to recognize how close the ground was getting. Dirt roads, water tanks, even trees, visible and getting closer. Somewhere near the front, a child kept repeating the same quiet phrase over and over. Nobody hushed her. It sounded like a prayer. Maybe it was. Back in the cockpit, Ayana saw something that made her stomach turn. A red light blinked beneath the secondary panel. Fuel vapor pressure warning, she said aloud. You've got buildup in the left wing, probably suction from the sealed valves. If it leaks on impact, the captain muttered something under his breath. You'll need to keep the left wing up during touchdown. Tilt slightly. Come in on the right. But that'll tip us, the captain began. I know. He hesitated. How confident are you? Ayana met his eyes. I'm not, but I've read 6 accident reports where no one tried. Every single one ended the same way. The plane dipped gently, then leveled. The co-pilot reached for the landing gear lever. We're coming in. Ayana held her breath. He pulled. Nothing. Manual? We already tried. Then leave it, Ayana said. We're going belly down. The ground was coming up fast now. No flaps, no throttle, just momentum. There, she pointed. That flat stretch past the marker poles. Aim for that. The captain nodded, locking in. The plane glided forward, not flying, but falling with focus. And then, impact. The front slammed hard against the earth, skidding across dirt, gravel, and uneven terrain. Sparks exploded beneath them. Ayana felt the frame twist left, the right side dug deep. The tail started to swing. Screams filled the cabin. Seatbelts held. A few oxygen masks snapped loose. Something heavy slammed into the rear wall. Ayana braced against the cockpit side. The nose lifted once, slammed again. The tail bucked wide. And then, silence. The dust hung in the air like fog. No one moved. Are we, the co-pilot began. Ayana didn't respond. She pressed her palm to her chest, her heart still racing, and turned to unlock the cockpit door. The cabin was chaos. Masks dangled. People sobbed. Some sat frozen in disbelief. But they were alive. Every single one of them. She stepped into the aisle, lifted her voice above the shock. "We're down. You're okay, but we need to evacuate." "Stay calm. Follow crew instructions," Ayana called out. A few people clapped. Most just sat in stunned silence. Near the back, a little boy vomited into a paper bag. Ayana turned back to the cockpit. "We need to start the emergency hatches. I can help." The pilot looked at her like he was still trying to understand how she was even standing. "You just landed this plane," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "You did. I just reminded you how." But walking away from a landing like that was going to leave a mark deeper than anything physical. Smoke curled out from the left wing. Ayana was the first to step off the aircraft, leading passengers out through the rear hatch. She helped the elderly, cradled a crying toddler into their mother's arms, and guided the nervous one step at a time. Her shoes crunched over dry grass, dirt, and scattered rocks. This wasn't a proper runway. It barely qualified as a landing zone, but it had been enough. No fire crews, no tower, just wind, silence, and the smell of scorched metal. Somewhere nearby, a siren finally echoed, probably from a local fire team pinged by the emergency transponder. Ayana took a few steps back, trying to catch her breath. Her hands started to shake, not in the cockpit, not during descent, but now. Now they trembled. That's when the captain emerged. His shirt was soaked through with sweat, one sleeve torn at the elbow. He found her immediately. "You didn't just help," he said. "You gave us a chance when we had nothing." Ayana didn't respond. She didn't need applause. She didn't want a spotlight. This wasn't about that. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you hadn't stood up, if you'd stayed quiet, we wouldn't be here." Ayana looked over at the passengers scattered across the dirt. Families holding each other, people on their phones crying, a woman sitting cross-legged in the dust, clutching her daughter like she'd never let go again. "I wasn't supposed to be on this flight," Ayana murmured. "They bumped me off the earlier one." The captain gave a faint, exhausted smile. "Maybe someone made sure you were on this one." In the distance, the first fire truck bounced over the uneven road. Behind it came an ambulance and a sheriff's cruiser covered in dust. The co-pilot jogged over, headset still hanging around his neck. "News crews already picked it up. FAA's been pinged. They'll want a full breakdown." "Let them write whatever they want," Ayana said. "Just make sure they spell my name right." He chuckled. "Dr. Ayana Fielding. Trust me, they'll remember." When the buses arrived to take everyone to a nearby community center, Ayana stayed back, slipping quietly among the crowd. No photos, no interviews, no attention. As she climbed aboard one of the buses, a hand reached out and caught hers. It was the same woman from earlier, the one who couldn't get her mask on. Her daughter stood beside her, clutching her leg. "I didn't know who you were," the woman whispered. "I didn't realize you were the one helping us." Ayana gave a gentle nod. "You didn't need to. You just needed to believe we'd make it." The woman looked like she wanted to say more, but Ayana squeezed her hand softly and moved down the aisle. The bus was nearly silent as it pulled away. Most passengers were too drained to speak. Some whispered into phones. Others just stared out the window, watching the wreckage fade into the distance. Ayana sat in the third row, leaned her head against the glass, and finally let out a long breath. 12 hours earlier, she'd been on a simple trip to see her mother. Now she was the reason 147 people were still breathing. As the bus rumbled down the dirt road, the man from seat 14A walked up and stopped beside her. "I owe you an apology," he said. "When you stood up, I thought you were out of your mind." She looked at him. "I don't blame you." He hesitated. "I think I'm going to go back to school," he said. "Study something real. I'm tired of pretending I know things when people like you actually do." Ayana didn't say anything. She just nodded. She smiled softly. Then it was worth it. The rest of the bus ride passed in silence. No music, no chatter. Just the quiet stillness of people who had all come through something they couldn't explain. A strange peace settled in, like everyone understood life felt different now, and maybe always would. They might move on, they might go home, but they'd never forget this. And what Ayana had done What she'd stepped up and refused to let go wrong would echo far beyond that dirt runway. The story made national headlines, of course. Unbelievable heroism on Flight 227. Professor saves doomed plane. Passenger with military background prevents disaster. Every outlet told it a little differently. Some got the facts right, most didn't. They aired shaky cell phone clips of the scorched fuselage, dust blowing across the wreck, passengers in shock, wrapped in foil blankets. Some called it a miracle, others spun it into debates. Pilot preparedness, aging systems, airline safety. But no matter how the story was told, one thing kept showing up. Her name, Dr. Ayanna Fielding. Reporters camped outside her university in Amarillo. Her office, students jokingly started calling it Mission Control. Her inbox overflowed. Messages from strangers, from former students, from people just wanting to say thank you. She didn't reply to any of them. Ayanna never wanted fame. She didn't want to be on TV. She didn't even want recognition. All she wanted was to finish what she'd started, to visit her mom. 2 days later, after quietly renting a car, Ayanna drove into southern Colorado. No spotlight, no interviews, just a knock on a weathered front door in Pueblo. Her mother opened it slowly, leaning on her walker. She was already expecting her. "Was that you I saw on the news?" she asked, voice scratchy. Ayanna gave a small smile. "Yeah." Her mother shook her head. "You were always too smart to stay silent." They sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, watching soft rain tap at the window. And for the first time in days, Ayanna allowed herself to feel what she hadn't let out, not during the drop, not during the landing. Fear, not panic, not the screaming, just the quiet, bone-deep fear of knowing lives depended on you, and you might fail. "I wasn't sure we were going to make it," she whispered. Her mother gently placed a hand over hers. "Doesn't matter," she said. "You stood up anyway." That night, Ayanna laid on the old couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the radiator. No phones, no emails, no chaos, just the stillness that comes after surviving the storm. 3 weeks later, she returned to work. Her students stood when she walked in. She waved them off. "Sit, we've got work to do." One raised a hand. "Professor Fielding, is it true you landed a plane?" She didn't smile, she didn't joke. "Yeah," she said. "And I'm here to teach you how to make sure you're never in that position." They listened differently now, not because she was in the headlines, but because they saw what real leadership looks like, what quiet strength actually means. And maybe that was the real story. Ayanna didn't act because she wanted praise. She didn't speak up to prove something. She acted because she saw something broken and knew how to fix it. In the months that followed, a few passengers reached out. One sent a family photo from the holidays, writing, "We're here because you didn't wait for permission." A little girl mailed her a drawing, a woman with wings, smiling at the front of a plane. Ayanna pinned it above her desk, not for anyone else, just to remember. Because sometimes the person no one notices, the one no one thanks, no one hears, is the one who saves your life. Ayanna Fielding didn't look like a pilot. She didn't wear a badge. She didn't speak first. But when no one else knew what to do, she did. And she stood up. So if this story stays with you, hold on to this. Leadership isn't always loud. Courage doesn't always ask for permission. When your moment comes, don't wait for someone to call on you. Stand up, do the right thing.